These are my favorite videos to film, and I am so excited to talk to you guys about my May reads. So let's get to it. I mean, it was May, right? It is May. It was May. I was like, was it just August? Was it just June? I honestly, sometimes time just escapes me. I don't even know anymore. I'm excited to talk to you guys about my May reads because I read some really good books this month, and yes, let's get to it. So the first book I read this month was The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker, and this was dark and riveting and just such an extreme that I wasn't prepared for, but also was like so excited to read. It was such a switch up for me from what I've been reading lately that I was like so captivated by like what this author was writing, and was like, is this even allowed, kind of, because it was so dark and twisted in a way. I don't know, it just hooks you. To give you a little summary of this book, Chrissy is the main character, and when she's 8 years old, she murders a child. That's right, an 8-year-old murders another child. And that is the beginning of this book. So you can only imagine where it goes from there. The author, interestingly enough, she, just to give you an idea of like how skilled she is at understanding this topic and like fully embracing it and using terminology and everything that is like so deep. To give you an idea of how she can do that, she graduated from the University of Oxford with a degree in experimental psychology. So she really knows how to express this idea of like that psychology of someone who's been abandoned as a child and what they do and perceive the world because of that, and maybe some of the actions that come from being abandoned. And obviously it's a very extreme when there's an 8-year-old who is a murderer, but it is really interesting to hear a perspective of a younger character and also go through something so dark and like have an understanding of like, how did this happen, what's going on, that kind of deal. So highly recommend if you're looking for more of like a dark spin novel. This is a good like thriller psychology sort of gist novel that I would recommend. After such a dark read, I had to switch it up to a romance, something light, something summery. I mean, May was like getting a little bit warmer, so I read the highly anticipated Emily Henry's Book Lovers. I'm sure you have seen this all over the internet. If you're watching a lot of May reading wrap-ups, I'm sure you have seen this reviewed plenty of times, so I'll try to keep it quite brief here, as I'm sure you've seen this. But it is a cutesy romance novel. To give you a summary of this novel, Nora is an aspiring editor, but right now she is like a manager of people who write books, and she goes into a small town to have a weekend away with her sister Libby, and she runs into her arch nemesis, Charlie, who is an editor of authors, and it's basically a small town, enemies to lovers romance. And the banter in this book is by far the best part about this book. If you know Emily Henry, she's a great author when it comes to banter. And because both of the characters are in the world of like editors and author managers, like the characters in this book do that, the way they banter is like very mature, and there's kind of some mockery of like romance tropes in here because they edit romance books. Anyways, it's really cute, and if you're looking for just like a lighthearted read, definitely read this. Another fun aspect of this book is that Nora and Libby, the two sisters, have a bit of a like sister relationship in this story that is pretty heartfelt, kind of frustrating at some points. If I'm being honest, I really hated Libby in this story. She just frustrated me to no ends. She was like a younger sibling who just was being a classic younger sibling, and just, you know, needing attention at all times and also needing independence at all times. And Nora was being a classic older sibling where she was like controlling Livy and wanting to help Livy and like be a part of Livy's life, and Livy's like, give me my younger sibling freedom. And it was just a kind of frustrating classic sibling dynamic that I was honestly bored of. So that part of the story was kind of a downer, but the romance part of the story was really cute. So if you like small town and good banter and a little bit of like enemies to lovers, then this is a good one for you. The next book I read was a Calling Hoover, because I'm really trying to read one Calling Hoover a month to be able to complete all of Calling Hoover's books. And if I'm being honest, I feel like I read all of the best Calling Hoovers already, and all of these older ones, like this one, Regretting You, are honestly disappointing me. I was so bored of this book. It's basically about a relationship between Morgan and Clara, which are a mother and daughter relationship. And the mother is really trying to make sure her daughter doesn't follow in her footsteps of burying a child young. And then also Morgan at the same time is falling in love with a guy that her mom doesn't approve of. There's also a loss in the story, so it's a little bit of like of that trauma of the loss and getting over it together, and mother-daughter relationship of like what happens when they both lose someone together, etc., etc. And honestly, it was a cute book and it had its moments, but the miscommunication that was drawn out from like chapter 1 to the very last chapter was agonizing. Like I'm for a miscommunication trope, okay? Like typically a romance or typically a thriller has miscommunication, but for it to take up the entire book was so frustrating. I almost was gonna DNF it halfway through, because typically with a miscommunication, you know what's going to happen. Like you're like, okay, I understand the miscommunication here, and I understand how they can solve it, and they just need to freaking talk, you know? There's nothing to it. There's no twist to a miscommunication. It's just the two characters need to talk, aka a miscommunication. And for that to take up the entire novel and to be basically the whole summary and premise of this novel was completely frustrating, and I was almost gonna DNF it, but I was so committed to, you know, finishing another Calling Hoover. This is definitely by far my least favorite, but if you enjoy a mother-daughter trope and you enjoy kind of getting out of a loss, then this is maybe something that you'd enjoy. But there's definitely better Calling Hoovers out there that I would recommend. Particularly if you're looking for some Verity, It Ends With Us, you know, all the popular ones you've probably seen on TikTok by now. Go to those first and then maybe try this. Right, then, actually one more novel before I get to like my favorite novels from this month. The next novel I listened to an audiobook, so let me just pull up the title and pop a photo here or here. One of those sides, I can't decide yet. Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of a life interrupted by, I hope I say this correctly, Solika Jacquard. I don't know if I said that properly, but I tried. Basically, it's a very in-depth memoir of someone who's going through an illness and their recovery. This memoir is very sad. It was just really impactful to read or listen to, and I would highly recommend to anyone if you're looking for something that's a bit more deeper, but I do want to give a warning that it is incredibly sad and very deep when it comes to, you know, exploring the meaning of life and like the meaning of life when you're hit with an illness. So just want to give that warning that it's obviously not a lighthearted summer read, but it can give you a lot of depth and perspective on your life. And if you know anyone who's going through a similar illness, maybe it will help you to kind of more so understand and, you know, be there for them in a more appropriate way. So that's all I can say about that one. I do not rate memoirs, so don't ever ask me for a rating on a memoir. I feel weird rating essentially someone's life, so I will not be rating that memoir or any memoir. There you go. All right, now to my favorite books from this month, and I cannot wait to like make an entire video just on this series when I'm completed, but I've only finished the first 2 books so far, so I can only give you my review of the first 2 books, and that is the Cruel Prince series, or what people, I don't know why series always have their like own names, but the entire series is actually classically known as the Folk of Air series. I don't really understand why. To be honest, I've read these first 2 books and I don't know why they would call it the Folk of Air series. Like, there's not really any air kind of happening. No person really has a magical ability with air, so I don't know why it's called the Folk of Air. Why isn't it just called the King of Elfram series or something, you know? I don't know. Or the High King series. I don't know. But in any case, the first one I read was The Cruel Prince, and I enjoyed this one quite a lot. To give you a summary of this book, Jude, who is a mortal girl, aka human like us, is in a fairyland, and her parents are murdered by one of the high people in this fairyland called Maddock, and essentially there's like a power dynamic of a lot of different princes and a lot of different high up people, including Maddock, who are all looking to become the next High King, because the High King right now is going into like retirement or dying essentially. Anyways, there's a new High King that's needed, and there's a power dynamic and fight to be the next High King. And it just unravels from there. I feel like I can't really give you much more than that, but the twist and turn and the fight to be in such a powerful position is so interesting and so like it keeps you going the whole book. It's so exciting to see what Jude does, what Maddock does, what Cardan does. There's like a little bit of romance, but it is a YA book, so it's very like tamed romance, and it's kind of that like enemies to lovers romance. Like, you kind of hate them but you love them. I don't know, I still don't even know. I finished the second one and I'm like, really don't know. The one thing I will say about this first book, The Cruel Prince, is that there isn't a lot of like character development. There's a lot more world building and character traumas explained, but not a lot of like character development. Like, you basically only know what has happened to that character in their life, but not necessarily know them as a person. Which, honestly, I don't mind too much because it makes this book a lot smaller. If she were to do a character development of each character, this book would be probably the size of a lot of Sarah J. Maas's books, which I don't feel is quite like YA appropriate. So I do appreciate that she didn't necessarily want to expand this book just for that sake, but it did make it harder to fall in love with the characters or really understand if a character is actually bad or if just what has happened to them has made them bad, if that makes sense. The second one in that series is obviously The Wicked King, and this one was a lot better to me than The Cruel Prince. I'm glad I kind of stuck through it. If it wasn't for the power dynamic in The Cruel Prince, I'm not sure I would have necessarily jumped to this one. I like The Cruel Prince alone as it is, but this one is so good. It's crazy. I just finished it this morning, so maybe I'm a bit biased, but the ending, I can't even. Like, what happens between Jude and Cardan is just hard to fathom, and I'm confused because, if I'm being honest, I really did ship, like, I was in love with the Cardan and Jude dynamic. And if you know, you know. If you finish this, then you know that I am now very confused after finishing it. Like, how do I feel? I don't know how I feel. Someone please tell me. Don't spoil it for me because I have the last book that I'm reading. And I'll give more of an in-depth review of this. I think I'm going to make a whole separate video on just the Cruel Prince series and explain them in depth. And then at the end of that video, give more of like a spoiler review because I don't want to spoil this for you. But it's a great sequel to the Cruel Prince series, and again, it's just a continuation of that power dynamic and like fighting to be in that high king position, and also a lot of magic that is happening in this novel, and the change of magic and being able to yield off magic from other characters in order to like power dynamic your next move. It's just, there's so many different moving parts in the series that is so exciting to read. Like one person is totally in control and then all of a sudden you see their evil plan like kind of maneuver and you're like, whoa, how did they think that through? How did they have that entire plan laid out before I even like understood what was going on? It's just, and it's not just that happening between two characters, it's like that power dynamic happening between 5 or 6 characters. Like there's 5 or 6 different characters all within the same like power group that are fighting, and them all having their own schemes, some working together, some not, but also the ones that are working together like switch over to different teams. It's just, there's so much going on. It's amazing. And yeah, highly recommend that series so far, but I'm not done yet, so I'm really hoping the last book doesn't ruin it for me. But yeah, that's it. That is my reading wrap up for May. If you've watched this far, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It's really nice to have you guys a part of my community here, and I can't wait to see you at my next video. So